Welcome back to Mind Over Masculinity, where we unpack what it truly means to be strong. Not through silence or perfection, but through growth, grit, and genuine self awareness. I am Sayan, and today's episode is one that hits home for anyone who's ever faced their breaking point and wondered, how do I turn this around? Our guest is someone who's mastered that art. Meet Dr. Danny Brassell, affectionately known around the world as Jim Carrey with a PhD. Over his extraordinary career, Danny has delivered more than 3,500 keynotes across the globe, authored 19 books, including Leadership Begins with Motivation and Misfits and Crackpots, and co-founded the Wellcrafted Story Workshop, helping people transform their personal experiences into powerful stories that inspire, connect, and convert. But tonight, we are not just talking about success, we're talking about the mental journey of an individual behind it. Because Danny has turned one of the most mentally, tough times of his life in a source of extraordinary purpose and leadership. His story just reminds me that masculinity isn't about never falling, it's about what we build when we get back up. So let's dive right in, Danny. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today.
The pleasure is mine, Simon. Thanks for all that you do. I really appreciate you spreading some joy around the world.
Wonderful. So, Dr. Danny, I want to start right where your story really begins. Not on the stage, not on the spotlight, but in the season of life most people never see. Because before the books, the keynotes, the laughter, there was a breaking point in your life that almost took you out. So, you've spoken to audiences worldwide about motivation and mindset, but before the success, what was that moment like? And what shifted in that moment that allowed you to start rebuilding yourself?
That's a great question, Simon. So if I was going to write an autobiography, it would probably be called Pivots because I feel like I've already lived 9 lives. 30 years ago, I was a reporter covering President Bush Sr. in the 1992 presidential election. Loved my job, got to meet every editor of every major daily. And one editor offered me the city beat for $16,500 a year. Meanwhile, a friend told me that they were hiring teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So I became an educator for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay. And I actually fell in love with teaching. I've taught all age levels, from preschoolers all the way up to rocket scientists. I can make that claim because I used to teach English as a second language to engineering students at the University of Southern California. And then in 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything. And I could give you the woe is me story, but I'm a positive person. I learned a lot from that experience. First of all, I learned that my wife is my soulmate. I put her through the ringer and she stood right by me. She's an incredible human being. Second of all, I learned money's not everything because you can lose money just like that. Third, I try not to judge other people because if I was somebody who saw what I had done, I would have said, well, you deserve that. But now I realize unless you know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian, which I'm always embarrassed to confess it's a catastrophe. But the more I read the Bible, I realize I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And
Right.
fifth, most applicable to your audience is I didn't want to declare bankruptcy. And my accountant said, well, you have to make this much more money this year. And so I started speaking on the side and I hit that number right on the number. Well, the next year, Sion, he gave me a much higher number and I hit that number right on the number. So in year three, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically, during one of the worst economic downturns in world history, I was able to build up a highly lucrative speaking business, which eventually attracted the attention of some pretty famous people and companies who asked me to coach them. And I have to confess, Sion, I really resisted coaching for a long time because you need to know this about me. I have a very high standard for my students. I will not let you fail. I will be on your back, holding you accountable until you succeed. Well, now that I work primarily with entrepreneurs and executives and business leaders, I find that they're highly motivated. They do the work. It's probably been the most rewarding thing that I've ever done. But really, in addressing your question, I want your audience to know that when you're in those darkest spots, just realize that there's bright pastures ahead for you.
Oh, that's powerful, Danny, and that's what I find so fascinating about your journey. You didn't just rebuild; you rebuilt with intention, and a big part of that intention was humor. So you would put. So let's talk about that humor part because most people, including me, at some point, would or wouldn't associate laughter with leadership. So you're known as Jim Carrey with a PhD, a mix of humor and heart. How has laughter helped you heal, and why do you think humor is such a underrated leadership tool? Now, yeah, there's a lot to it. Like, we could get deeper into the conversation about neuroscience and, how does it help the body um, deal with difficult times. But how does it help in leadership, especially for men?
Well, so I'll cite a very incredible resource, the movie Monsters Inc. Basically, they've discovered that laughter is actually more powerful than tears. Most people out there coaching people to speak, they tell people if you really want to connect with your audience, you need to talk about your worst moments in your life. And there's three reasons why they refuse to do that. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had bad things happen to them. I don't think we need more sad stories. I think we need more stories of hope. Second of all, what I teach people how to do is how to create what I call a well-crafted story. Politicians would call it a stump speech. You can call it peanut butter and jelly. It doesn't matter what you call it. This is a speech that you're going to deliver again and again to introduce yourself to new audiences with the intention of getting them to want to work further with you. Well, do you really want to talk about the worst moment of your life again and again? I mean, I have a friend,
Right.
his daughter was killed in a school shooting. He's told that story over 1,000 times. You got to be a lot stronger than me to talk about the worst day of your life again and again. And third, and this is where people get angry with me. I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you laughing, smiling, happy. I think there's something very powerful and admirable about that. I believe the people that tell the same sad story again and again, by the 20th time they're telling that story, now those are crocodile tears and now they're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales strategy. It's actually a very effective sales strategy. But I personally don't want to have to take a shower after I get off stage because I just manipulated my audience. There are actually ethical ways to get people to want to do business with you. Now, in direct relation to your question, this is the power of humor. Humor is a great tool for connecting with people. So right now I'm working with a Silicon Valley firm of engineers. And let's just say engineers are pretty introverted. They're not exactly the most humorous people. And one of the reasons I was attracted to your show was because, I love India. I love everything about India. I can't wait to get back there, Sayan. Well, one of the engineers I'm working with is an Indian engineer, and he has a very difficult name to pronounce. And he's like, Daddy, please make me funny. I have to connect. And so now I'm not going to give you his real name. So now we have him. He starts his presentation. He says, "Hello, my name is Shubanakar Majahardin. Gee, I sure hope I'm pronouncing that correctly." And we're not trying to get him to be a stand-up comedian. All I'm trying to do is to get his audience to just smile like, "Oh, this guy is like us." Because when you're creating a powerful presentation, the first 5 minutes of your presentation, you have to forgive me, I'm a former teacher, so everything I do is either alliterative or it rhymes. But in the first 5 minutes, you have to rap. You have to prove to your audience you relate to them. You have to demonstrate your authority, and then you have to show them your purpose. So relatable. Hey, I'm just
Absolutely.
like you. I've had the same problem you've had, authority, and I solved that problem, purpose. And now I'm on a mission to help people just like you so you don't have to suffer the way I suffered. If you can do that, now you have a presentation with intention.
Absolutely, absolutely, Dr. Danny. It helps, I think, the room, exhale out and connect with you. Just if even if you you don't have to say much, just make them relate to you in some way. And I think that's the most powerful aspect of it. And that actually leads me to something I've always admired about your work. You just don't make people laugh; you make them reflect. And a big part of that comes through storytelling, right? Not just the polished version, not the highlight reel, but kind of the storytelling that it turns lived experience into something useful for others. So let's go there. You talk about importance of sharing the scar, not the wound itself, right? What does it actually take to tell your story in a way that's honest and vulnerable without, oversharing? That's something I think most men would fear, collapsing or, turning into a self-pity. How do you know when a story is ready to serve instead of spill?
Well, there's a lot in that question, so I'll answer it in several parts. So first of all, this is a strategy for your audience. Stop sharing your successes. Start sharing your failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you share your own failures, the more your audience is going to see themselves in you. And that's what you're really trying to do in a presentation is connect. Hey,
Right.
I want with Sayan because I feel very comfortable with him. He's just like me. I was speaking you and I were talking beforehand. I was speaking in Southeast India in Tamil Nadu in 2018. I was pumping up kids at different schools. And at the end of one of my presentations, all the kids are coming up. They're all happy, excited. Oh, you're great or whatever. Then I see a little boy. He looks up at me. He's crying. He's about 6 years old, and I notice he's missing his left arm. And he says,
Oh.
"What can you do to succeed?" And so I get down to his eye level. I say, when I was your age, I went to 18 different schools before I was 12 years old. Everybody called me stupid because I stutter. And eventually I went to a school where a teacher, she worked one-on-one with me, and she would sing things to me, and I found I could sing them back without my stutter. It's kind of like the movie The King's Speech. And eventually I lost my stutter and I became a swan. But I looked at that boy in the eyes. I'm like, isn't it interesting that the little boy that people used to make fun of and say he was stupid because he couldn't talk right now gets paid ridiculous sums of money to travel the planet to do what? And he gets the biggest grin on his face. He's like, speak. And I'm like, don't let anybody ever tell you what you cannot do. Everything is possible. And so that's a story with intention. There's a difference between good speakers and great speakers. A good speaker tells you lots of stories. A great speaker, there's an intent behind all of those stories. They're guiding you to take the next step with you. And that's the only way I evaluate our effectiveness with our clients is that if people say you're a great speaker, that's wonderful. If they give you a standing ovation, that's wonderful too. But the only way we evaluate your effectiveness is how many people in your audience are taking that next step with you. Now, it can be an unpaid next step, like subscribe to my podcast or vote for me. It can be a paid next step, like buy my product or invest in my coaching program. But we want to know our numbers and know how many people are deciding, hey, you're attracted to me. I want to go on a second date with you.
Hmm. That's wow, that's inspiring, Dr. Danny. That hits hard because I think a real strength isn't about, never needing help. It's about having the courage to admit you do. And that brings me to something for all the listeners listening to this right now. For someone who is in that low point today, what's one practical step that they can take tonight to start shifting their story from wherever they are in their, in their lives at whatever point it is, and how can you story tell um, and help them become a tool not just for healing but for impact and purpose the way it has for you?
That's a great question, Sayan. So too many people, they get stuck in the low point of their story. They don't realize that better things are possible if you believe in that. So here's an exercise all of your audience can do is later on, you can do this too, Sayan. Later on, I want you to sit in a comfortable chair with a pen and paper, a libation of choice beside you. And for an hour, I want you to write every story that's ever happened in your life. And I don't mean the entire story. I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of the grocery store, the time dad spilled mustard on his tie at that fancy restaurant. You'll find in an hour, you can come up with hundreds of stories like this. So this is the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise, I want you to think about what's this story really about? Oh, this is a story about never giving up. Oh, this is a story about loyalty. Oh, this is a story about my priorities. And so on my computer, I have hundreds of files with literally tens of thousands of stories. So whenever I'm developing a presentation and I want my audience to feel a certain emotion, I know exactly the story that I'm going to use to get that emotion. So I'll give you an example. I'm working with a nutritionist right now. We'll call her Kathy. And Kathy, her presentation, her offer, she has a program for women overcoming this intestinal problem. And if they work with her, she has a 90-day program for $2,000. And that's where she ended her presentation. Like, no, you're not connecting with your audience there. We have to have an emotional close that brings people to stampede to buy it. And she's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, what do you want your audience to do? And she's like, well, buy my product. I'm like, well, I started questioning her more. And finally, she said, well, I want my audience to understand they can't do this on their own. I'm like, you need to hire an expert story. And she's like, what's that? And I'm like, I'll give you an example. Many years ago, my wife and I, we had theater tickets. We were dressed to the nines, driving to the theater when we got a flat tire. And my wife said, well, I'll call AAA, the tow truck. I'm like, you don't have to call AAA. I'm a man. I can fix a flat tire. So I got out of the car, I opened up the trunk, and I got the spare tire, and then I got the pumper thing, and then I got the jack thing to take off the nuts on the tire. Basically, 27 minutes later, I had grease all over me. I hadn't fixed the flat tire. My wife standing beside the car with her arms crossed, shaking her head like I could have done so much better than this guy. Well, unbeknownst to me, she had called the tow truck 27 minutes earlier. Tow truck shows up, and this 17-year-old punk kid hops out of that tow truck, and he proceeds to fix my flat tire in 3 minutes. You know, I think there's times in like when all of us think we can do it on our own. But if you want to save time, you want to save money, you want to save a whole lot of headache and embarrassment,
Hmm.
you hire an expert. And so what I've just done, Sayan, is I've taken a story and used it as a metaphor to embed in the audience's minds. You know, I've tried lots of things in the past. Maybe I need to just hire somebody else to help me get to the finish line.
Right, right. That's the key takeaway. I think, yeah, and it all starts with retrospection, Danny, as you've mentioned, and then coming back to, okay, what can I take away from this? I think that's the key, you know, uh, lesson from today's conversation. Thank you so much, Danny, for this, inspiring conversation. You showed us that the same story that once broke you, you can become the one that builds your legacy. And just before we wrap things off, Danny, I just want to ask you that where can listeners connect to you? For everyone who's listening to it right now.
Well, Sayan, as a thank you to you and your audience for having to listen to me, I wanted to give everybody a freebie. So if you go to freestoryguide.com, guide like a tour guide, freestoryguide.com, I'm going to give everybody their own well-crafted story blueprint. What this is the exact process that Coach Jimmy, my partner, and I take our clients through so we can help you create your well-crafted story. What this does for you is it takes the guesswork out of where do I put this story and why am I putting it here? And what this means for you is you have a system, an actual tool that's going to turn all of your audiences into clients that will work with you again and again and again. You get that at freestoryguide.com. And Sayan, I'm so grateful for all that you do, for having me on. And I need to get to India to work with you because, my passion is with India. I think India is the present, the future, everything right now.
Amazing, amazing, Danny. Dear listeners, I'll have the details in the show notes for you so you can check them out anytime at your own convenience. And with that comes an end to today's inspiring and grounding conversation with Dr. Danny. He reminded us that transformation doesn't begin in the spotlight. It begins when no one's actually watching. Your story, Danny, proves that humor and heart can coexist with hardship, and that sharing our scars can give others the strength to heal theirs. To everyone listening, if you're in middle of something, if you're in middle of your lowest moment right now, remember this. It's not the end of your story, right? As Dr. Danny says, it might be just the chapter that teaches you how to rise. So I want you to start small, speak the truth, and keep moving towards your own extraordinary. This is Mind Over Masculinity, and I'm Sayan. Until next one, stay open, stay grounded, and remember, your mind isn't your enemy. It's the greatest ally when you learn how to feel it. Thank you so much.